A man stands before a firing squad in the frozen dawn of December 1849, 28 years old, convinced these are his final seconds on earth. The rifles raise, commands echo across the parade ground. Then, at the last possible moment, a horseman gallops up with a reprieve from the Tsar. It was theatre, a calculated cruelty designed to break the condemned. For Fyodor Dostoyevski, those minutes waiting to die became the defining experience of his existence, the moment that would haunt every page he ever wrote and transform him into one of literature's most relentless explorers of the human soul. This is the story of a man who descended into hell and returned to tell us what he saw. He was born on October 30th, 1821, in Moscow, at the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor. His father, Mikhail, worked there as a physician, a stern and increasingly paranoid man who ruled his household with rigid discipline. The hospital grounds became young Fyodor's entire world, a place where human suffering was not abstract, but visible through every window. Children of the poor lined up outside. The sick and dying filled the wards. Death was ordinary, poverty unremarkable. Fyodor's mother, Maria, was gentler, more devout. She read to her children from the Bible and from Russian folk tales, planting seeds of both faith and imagination. The family was neither wealthy nor destitute, occupying that precarious middle ground of minor nobility, where respectability required constant effort, and any misfortune could mean ruin. Moscow itself was a city of contrasts in the 1820s. Napoleon's invasion was still recent memory. Buildings bore scars from the Great Fire of 1812. Old wooden churches stood beside new stone construction. The city smelled of wood smoke, and horses rang with church bells and teemed with beggars alongside aristocrats in gilded carriages. For a sensitive child, it was an education in inequality. When Fyodor was 9, his mother purchased a small estate called Darovoye, about 100 miles from Moscow. The family spent summers there, and for the first time, the boy encountered Russia's vast peasant population up close. These were serfs, human beings owned by other human beings, bound to the land with no rights, no freedom, subject to the whims of their masters. The moral obscenity of serfdom would become one of Dostoyevsky's great themes, though he would struggle his entire life with the contradictions it represented in his own family's position. At Darovoye, there was a peasant named Mari who showed young Fyodor kindness after the boy had a frightening encounter in the forest. Decades later, Dostoyevsky would write about this memory, about Mari's gentle reassurance, as evidence of the Russian peasant's inherent spiritual depth. It was a romanticized recollection, perhaps, but it shaped his conviction that redemption and grace existed even in the darkest circumstances. Then came the rupture. In 1837, when Fyodor was 15, his mother died of tuberculosis. The loss devastated him. That same year, Russia's greatest poet, Alexander Pushkin, was killed in a duel at age 37. The nation mourned. For Dostoyevsky, who worshipped Pushkin's work, it felt like a double death, the loss of his mother and the loss of the poet who had defined Russian literature. His father, already prone to dark moods and heavy drinking, spiraled further. He retired from his hospital position and moved permanently to Darovoye, where he became increasingly tyrannical toward the serfs who worked his land. The accounts are disputed, but 2 years later, in 1839, Mikhail Dostoyevsky was found dead in a ditch near the estate. The official cause was apoplexy, but rumours spread immediately. The peasants had murdered him, some said, in revenge for his cruelty. Whether this was true remains uncertain. Dostoyevsky himself never spoke publicly about his father's death in detail. But the shadow of it, the possibility of patricide, the question of whether his father's tyranny had provoked his own murder, would become the central obsession of his greatest novel, The Brothers Karamazov, written 40 years later. By the time his father died, Fyodor was already in St. Petersburg, enrolled at the Military Engineering Academy. It was not his choice. His father had insisted on practical training, something that would guarantee employment and security. Engineering was respectable, stable, exactly what a minor nobleman's son should study. Dostoyevsky hated it. He had no interest in fortifications or siege warfare or mathematical calculations. He wanted to write. He spent his evenings reading voraciously. Shakespeare, Schiller, Balzac, Hugo, Hoffmann. He translated Balzac's Eugénie Grandet into Russian just for practice. His classmates found him odd, withdrawn, intense. He had few friends and less money. The modest inheritance from his father barely covered expenses. But something was crystallizing. St. Petersburg in the 1840s was a city of ideas, ferment, radical thought bubbling beneath the surface of official autocracy. Tsar Nicholas I ruled with an iron fist. Censorship was pervasive, yet young intellectuals gathered in salons and apartments to debate socialism, atheism, revolution. Dostoyevsky, lonely and searching, was drawn into these circles. He graduated from the Engineering Academy in 1843 and took a position in the engineering department. He lasted less than a year. The work was suffocating. He resigned, announcing to his horrified brother Mikhail that he would support himself through writing alone. It was reckless, possibly insane. Writers in Russia starved unless they had patronage or independent wealth. Dostoyevsky had neither. What he had was a manuscript. He had written a novel called Poor Folk, an epistolary work about a low-level government clerk and a young seamstress. Two people ground down by poverty and circumstance, yet clinging to dignity and connection. The prose was sentimental by modern standards, but it captured something raw about urban destitution, about the psychological toll of being invisible in a vast, indifferent city. Dostoyevsky gave the manuscript to a friend, who passed it to Dmitry Grigorovich, who showed it to Nikolai Nekrasov, a poet and editor. Nekrasov read it through the night, and at 4 a.m. rushed to the apartment of Vissarion Belinsky, the most influential literary critic in Russia. "A new Gogol has appeared," Nekrasov announced. Belinsky was skeptical. New Gogols appeared every week in the fever dreams of young writers, but he read the manuscript, and then he summoned Dostoyevsky. The meeting changed everything. Belinsky, the great critic, the arbiter of Russian letters, embraced the unknown 24-year-old author. "Do you yourself understand what you have written?" he demanded. Poor Folk was published in 1846 to immediate acclaim. Dostoyevsky was celebrated, feted, invited to literary gatherings. For a few intoxicating months, he was the most promising young writer in Russia. Then came the backlash. His second novel, The Double, was a psychological nightmare about a government clerk who encounters his exact doppelganger, a more confident and successful version of himself, who gradually usurps his life. It was strange, unsettling, ahead of its time. Critics who had praised Poor Folk now mocked The Double as overwrought and incomprehensible. Belinsky turned cold. Other writers, jealous of Dostoyevsky's sudden fame, ridiculed him in print. Dostoyevsky, who craved acceptance and had briefly tasted it, was crushed. He became defensive, prickly, alienating the few allies he had left. His pride was wounded, his finances were desperate. He wrote frantically, producing stories and novellas to pay rent and debts, but nothing restored his initial reputation. Into this vulnerable moment came the Petrushevsky Circle. Mikhail Petrushevsky was a minor government official who hosted Friday evening gatherings at his apartment. Intellectuals came to discuss philosophy, social reform, and increasingly forbidden topics: socialism, the abolition of serfdom, the crimes of the autocracy. It was dangerous. The secret police monitored such gatherings. But for Dostoyevsky, lonely and angry at the injustices he saw everywhere, it was intoxicating. He attended regularly. He listened to arguments for utopian socialism, for the restructuring of society along rational, egalitarian lines. He heard denunciations of Tsar Nicholas I's regime, and at a smaller, more radical offshoot group, he heard something even more dangerous: talk of printing and distributing illegal literature, including Belinsky's banned letter attacking the government and the Orthodox Church. Dostoyevsky read this letter aloud at one of these secret meetings. He knew it was forbidden. He did it anyway, perhaps out of conviction, perhaps out of recklessness, perhaps simply because he was young and thought himself invincible. On April 23rd, 1849, at 4 a.m, the police came for him. Dostoyevsky was arrested, taken to the Peter and Paul fortress, and locked in a cell. He was 27 years old. For 8 months, he remained imprisoned while investigators interrogated him and other members of the Petrashevsky circle. The authorities wanted confessions, wanted to root out every thread of revolutionary sentiment. Dostoyevsky admitted to listening to seditious discussions, but downplayed his own involvement. It didn't matter. The regime was determined to make an example. On November 16th, 1849, he was convicted of conspiracy against the government and sentenced to death by firing squad. On December 22nd, in the freezing cold of a St. Petersburg winter morning, Dostoyevsky and 14 other prisoners were taken to Semyonovsky Square. A crowd had gathered. The sentence was read aloud. 3 men were tied to posts. Dostoyevsky was in the second group, watching, waiting his turn. He later described those minutes in excruciating detail: the sharpness of every sensation, the whiteness of the snow, the faces in the crowd, the certainty that, in moments, he would cease to exist. He thought about his life, about what it meant, about eternity. He felt, he said, that if he were granted life again, he would live every minute consciously, waste nothing, transform himself completely. The first group stood ready. Soldiers raised their rifles. The order to aim was given. Then a carriage arrived at full speed. An officer leaped out, waving a document. The execution was halted. The Tsar had commuted the sentences. It had been staged from the beginning, a psychological torture designed to terrorize the prisoners into submission before sending them to Siberia. One of the condemned men went permanently insane from the shock. Dostoyevsky's sentence was reduced to 4 years of hard labor in Siberia, followed by compulsory military service. On Christmas Eve, 1849, he was shackled and placed in a convoy heading east. He would not return to European Russia for a decade. As the sledge carried him into exile, into a frozen hell that would break him and remake him, Dostoyevsky carried with him a single book, a gift from the wife of one of the Decembrists, those earlier revolutionaries who had been exiled to Siberia a generation before. It was a New Testament, the only book prisoners were allowed to possess. He would read it obsessively during the years ahead, searching for meaning in the abyss. The mock execution had accomplished exactly what the Tsar intended. It had shattered Dostoyevsky's certainty, his youthful radicalism, his belief in rational solutions to human suffering. But it had also given him something else, a direct encounter with death, with terror, with the absolute fragility of existence. Everything he would write afterward would be shaped by those minutes at Semyonovsky Square. The questions that would define his greatest works were born in that moment. What does it mean to live when death is certain? How do we find meaning in suffering? Can human beings be perfected through reason, or is there something darker, more irrational at the core of our nature? The convoy disappeared into the vast whiteness of the Russian winter, carrying a broken young writer toward a prison camp in Omsk, toward 4 years of brutality that would destroy the man he had been and forge someone entirely new. What emerged from that crucible would be one of the most powerful voices in human literature, a writer who understood suffering not as abstraction but as lived experience, who could map the human soul in all its contradiction and darkness and desperate yearning for redemption. But first he had to survive. The convoy carrying Dostoyevsky eastward moved slowly through the Siberian winter. Iron shackles weighed 10 pounds. They cut into the ankles, chafed with every step. The cold was beyond anything he had known in St. Petersburg. 40 degrees below zero, 50. At those temperatures, breath freezes instantly. Exposed skin dies in minutes. The journey took weeks. At night, prisoners were herded into way stations, cramped wooden structures where they slept on bare planks. The guards were brutal. The other prisoners, mostly hardened criminals, viewed the political prisoners with suspicion and contempt. These educated gentlemen with their books and ideas knew nothing of real Russian life. Omsk. The prison camp sat in western Siberia, a fortress surrounded by wooden palisades. Inside, conditions were medieval. 200 prisoners crammed into barracks, designed for half that number. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, human waste and decay. Lice were everywhere. Disease spread constantly. Typhus, scurvy, pneumonia. The work was designed to break men. Prisoners hauled bricks in wheelbarrows. They shoveled snow. They crushed alabaster with hammers, breathing in toxic dust that destroyed lungs. In summer, the heat was crushing. In winter, frostbite claimed fingers and toes. Men worked in leg irons that were never removed. Not for sleep, not for work, not for the 4 years of their sentence. Dostoyevsky's epilepsy worsened dramatically. The seizures came more frequently, more violently. After each one, he would lie for hours in a fog of confusion and depression. The prison hospital offered no real treatment, just a cot away from the barracks and a brief respite from labour. But the physical suffering was not the worst of it. What tormented Dostoyevsky most was the complete absence of solitude. There was never a moment alone, never silence, never privacy. Every action was observed, every conversation overheard, the constant proximity of other bodies, other voices, other lives pressing in from all sides. For a writer, for someone who lived inside his own mind, this was a unique torture. He could not write. Prisoners were forbidden paper and pen. The work he had been doing, the identity he had built, the purpose of his existence, all of it was stripped away. He was now simply prisoner number 2, 723, indistinguishable from the murderers and thieves around him. Yet something unexpected happened in that hell. Dostoyevsky began to see. Not the romantic vision of the people he had embraced in his radical youth, but actual Russian peasants in all their complexity. These men, illiterate and brutalized, possessed a depth of spirit he had never imagined. They told stories, they sang, they maintained elaborate codes of honor, incomprehensible to outsiders. They suffered with a kind of dignity that shamed his own intellectual pretensions. One prisoner, a man named Akim Akimich, became a figure of fascination. He performed his labor with meticulous care, never complaining, never shirking, treating even the most degrading tasks as worthy of craftsmanship. He was serving a life sentence for murder. He had killed his commanding officer years earlier and accepted his punishment without bitterness or self-pity. There was something almost holy in his acceptance. Another man, Petrov, was a sociopath of pure form. He felt nothing, no guilt, no empathy, no fear. He had killed multiple people and would certainly kill again if given the chance. Yet he was intelligent, even charming when he chose to be. Dostoyevsky studied him with horrified fascination. What did it mean that such a creature could exist? That human nature contained this possibility. The intellectuals and nobles in the camp, men of Dostoyevsky's own class, mostly fared poorly. They could not adapt. They clung to their superiority, their education, their refinement. The common criminals despised them for it and made their lives miserable. Dostoyevsky learned to work alongside peasants, to speak their language, to earn a measure of respect through endurance rather than status. His New Testament became his lifeline. He read it constantly, searching the Gospels for answers to questions he had never seriously asked in his radical days. The figure of Christ began to obsess him. Not the historical Jesus or the theological Christ of doctrine, but Christ as a moral ideal, a vision of perfect humanity, complete love and self-sacrifice. Could such a figure actually have existed? And if so, what did it demand of those who claimed to follow him? The prison's major holiday was Easter. For 1 week each year, prisoners did not work. They drank whatever alcohol they could smuggle or brew. They staged elaborate theatrical performances. The transformation was startling. Men who seemed barely human for 51 weeks became artists, actors, storytellers. They possessed a hunger for beauty that the prison could not extinguish. Dostoyevsky watched a convict named Akulka die slowly from consumption. The man had perhaps 3 months to live. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Yet he continued working, dragging himself to labor each day until he physically could not stand. Why? What force drove him? It was not hope of release. It was not fear of punishment. It was something else, something Dostoyevsky was beginning to understand. The human being needs purpose more than comfort, meaning more than happiness. Strip everything away, and this remains. 4 years passed this way, slowly, each day identical to the last. The seasons cycling through their extremes. Men arrived, served their time, and left. Others died. The population churned, but the institution remained constant, grinding human beings into uniformity. In February 1854, Dostoyevsky's sentence ended, but he was not free. His punishment included compulsory military service in the Siberian line battalion stationed in Semipalatinsk, a desolate fortress town on the edge of the Kazakh steppe. He would remain a soldier under discipline for another 5 years, but the leg irons were removed. He was given a uniform, a room in the barracks, and most importantly, permission to write. The first thing he did was request paper and ink. Then he sat down and began to reconstruct himself through words. The prison experience had to be recorded, understood, transformed into meaning. He started drafting what would eventually become The House of the Dead, a fictionalized memoir of prison life that reads like a descent into the Russian underworld. Semipalatinsk was hardly freedom, but after Omsk it felt like paradise. He could walk outside the barracks. He could read books other than the New Testament. He began corresponding with his brother Mikhail again, letters that had to pass through military censors but still allowed connection to the world beyond. He fell desperately in love. Maria Dmitrievna Isaeva was the wife of a customs official, Alexander Isaev, a weak and alcoholic man, slowly drinking himself to death. She was 29, educated, attractive, and utterly unsuited to life in a remote Siberian outpost. Dostoyevsky's passion was immediate and overwhelming. He visited their home constantly, tutored their young son, and made himself indispensable to the family. When Alexander Isaev died in 1855, Dostoyevsky immediately proposed marriage. But Maria was ambivalent. She cared for him, certainly, but she also saw his poverty, his epilepsy, his uncertain future. Another suitor appeared, a young schoolteacher named Vergunov, handsome and healthy and uncomplicated. Maria encouraged both men, unable or unwilling to choose. The jealousy nearly destroyed Dostoyevsky. His letters from this period are frantic, desperate, melodramatic. He imagined Maria and Vergunov together. He spiraled into depression, so severe that his epileptic seizures increased. He borrowed money he could not repay to send her gifts. He begged. He threatened suicide. It was pathetic and human, and entirely characteristic of the emotional extremes that would define his fiction. Eventually, Maria chose Dostoyevsky, perhaps because Vergunov lost interest, perhaps because she recognized in Dostoyevsky's suffering a depth Vergunov lacked. They married in February 1857. It was not a happy marriage. Maria was ill with tuberculosis, though neither of them knew it yet. She was demanding, moody, and disappointed by the reality of life with an impoverished ex-convict soldier. Dostoyevsky discovered that romantic obsession and marital compatibility are entirely different things. But the marriage gave him stability, a home, however modest, a reason to work, to earn, to build a future. He resumed writing in earnest. The stories and novellas he produced during this period, The Village of Stepanchikovo, Uncle's Dream, were not his best work, but they marked his return to literature after nearly a decade of silence. In 1859, the new Tsar, Alexander II, granted Dostoyevsky permission to return to European Russia. The Siberian exile was over. He left Semipalatinsk with Maria, her son Pasha, and his own accumulated manuscripts. They travelled west, retracing in reverse the journey he had made 10 years earlier in chains. St. Petersburg had changed. Russia had changed. The idealism of the 1840s had curdled. The radicals he had known were dead, exiled, or silent. The new generation was harder, more cynical, more willing to embrace violence. Chernyshevsky and his circle preached a utilitarian materialism that Dostoyevsky found repulsive. They believed human beings were rational machines that could be perfected through proper social organization. Crime and suffering were products of bad systems, not moral failures. Fix the systems and you fix humanity. Dostoyevsky knew this was wrong. He had lived with murderers and thieves. He had seen Petrov's empty eyes. Human nature contained abysses that no social reform could eliminate. Evil was real. Suffering was not always unjust. And the idea that reason alone could guide humanity toward utopia was not just naive, but dangerous. He reunited with his brother Mikhail. Together they founded a literary journal called Vremya, Time. Dostoyevsky threw himself into editing, writing criticism, publishing fiction. He was rebuilding his career, re-establishing his name in Russian letters. Then in 1862, he made his first trip to Western Europe. He travelled through Germany, France, England, Switzerland, and Italy, visiting the great cities, the museums, the casinos. What he saw appalled him. The materialism, the moral decay hidden beneath the veneer of progress. London particularly horrified him. He walked through the slums, saw the prostitution and poverty, the human beings reduced to commodities in the great machine of industrial capitalism. He wrote about it in Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, a caustic travelogue that announced his complete break with Western liberalism. Europe had nothing to teach Russia. Its rationalism led only to spiritual emptiness. Its progress was built on exploitation. The Crystal Palace he saw at the World Exhibition, that great monument to Victorian confidence, struck him as a temple to Baal, a false god demanding human sacrifice. But Europe also offered temptation. In Wiesbaden, he discovered roulette. The first time he played, he won. The rush was extraordinary, unlike anything he had felt since before prison. The pure chance of it, the adrenaline, the way time compressed into the spin of a wheel. He was instantly addicted. Over the next several years, he would return to the casinos again and again, losing money he did not have, pawning his clothes, begging friends and family for loans he could never repay. The addiction was irrational, destructive, impossible to control. He knew it was destroying him even as he could not stop. It was as if he needed to prove through his own behaviour that human beings are not rational actors, that we contain within us drives that mockle utilitarian calculations of self-interest. Maria's health was failing. The tuberculosis advanced. She coughed blood. She grew thin and weak. The marriage, never strong, became a mutual torment. She knew about his gambling. He knew she had never really loved him. They stayed together because neither had anywhere else to go. In 1864, two catastrophes struck simultaneously. Maria died in April. Mikhail died in July. the woman he had obsessed over, and the brother he had depended on, both gone within months. Dostoyevsky was alone, drowning in debt from the journal, from his gambling, from medical expenses. He was 43 years old and had nothing. Out of this wreckage, he wrote Notes from Underground. Notes from Underground appeared in 1864, just months after the twin deaths. It is short, feverish, savage, not a novel in the traditional sense, but a psychological descent, a howl from beneath the floorboards of respectable society. The narrator is one of the most unpleasant characters in literature. A retired civil servant living alone in a shabby Petersburg apartment, consumed by resentment and self-loathing. He has no name, no physical description beyond his own claims of ugliness. He is pure consciousness, pure spite. He addresses the reader directly, aggressively, daring us to judge him. He admits he is sick, vicious, unattractive. He takes pleasure in his own degradation. The first part is a monologue, a confession, a philosophical rant. The underground man attacks the entire edifice of rational utilitarianism that dominated progressive thought. He mocks the idea that human beings act in their own self-interest, that we are guided by reason and enlightened calculation. He insists that people often act against their own interests deliberately, perversely, just to prove they are free. A man will choose suffering over comfort if it means asserting his own will. 2 + 2 = 4, yes, but what if I insist it equals 5 just because I refuse to be a piano key played by the laws of nature? The Crystal Palace, that symbol of rational progress Dostoyevsky had seen in London, becomes the target. The underground man imagines a future where science has explained everything, where society has been organized according to rational principles, where human beings live in perfect harmony because all their needs are met. He finds this vision horrifying. In such a world, what is left of human freedom? If we are nothing but rational machines responding to stimuli, then we are not free at all. We are slaves to determinism, and human beings will destroy any such system just to prove they still have agency. The second part shifts to narrative. The underground man recalls events from his youth, attempting to connect with old schoolmates who despised him, humiliating himself, trying to join their society. He engineers an encounter with a young prostitute named Liza, and in one of literature's cruelest scenes, he delivers a speech meant to save her soul, describing the horrors of her profession and offering her a vision of redemption. She is moved, vulnerable, open. Then when she comes to his apartment seeking help, he turns on her viciously, attacking her for daring to believe he actually cared. He wants to hurt her because he is in pain. He cannot bear genuine connection because it requires vulnerability he cannot afford. The underground man is a monster, but he is not lying. Everything he says about human nature, about the darkness we carry, about the irrationality that governs us, is true. Dostoyevsky was not endorsing his narrator. He was revealing something the rationalists refused to see. We are not perfectible through reason. We are fractured, contradictory, capable of choosing suffering just to feel alive. The progressive critics hated it. They recognized themselves in the underground man's targets and felt attacked. Dostoyevsky was labeled a reactionary, a pessimist, an enemy of progress. He did not care. He was done trying to please anyone. He was writing from a place beyond social approval, beyond career strategy. He was writing the truth as he had learned it in Siberia, in the casino, in his own infected heart. But he still needed money, desperately. The journal had collapsed after Mikhail's death, leaving Dostoyevsky personally liable for massive debts. Creditors pursued him. He could barely afford rent. In 1866, facing complete financial ruin, he made a deal with a predatory publisher named Stelovsky. In exchange for 3,000 rubles immediately, Dostoyevsky would deliver a new novel by November 1st. If he failed, Stellovsky would own the rights to everything Dostoyevsky had written, or would write for the next 9 years. It was extortion disguised as a contract. Dostoyevsky signed. He spent the advance immediately, paying off the most urgent debts. Then he realized what he had done. He had 4 months to write an entire novel, or lose his life's work. He was also in the middle of serializing Crime and Punishment, his most ambitious project yet. He could not stop working on that to write Stellovsky's novel. He would have to do both simultaneously. By October, he had written nothing for Stellovsky. 3 weeks remained. He tried dictating to friends, but it was too slow. Someone suggested hiring a stenographer. On October 4th, a 20-year-old woman named Anna Grigorievna Snitkina arrived at his apartment with her shorthand notebook. She was calm, competent, utterly unintimidated by the famous writer's panic. Dostoyevsky dictated The Gambler in 26 days. Every morning he would pace and speak, working out scenes aloud. Every afternoon, Anna would return with clean transcriptions. He would edit, she would recopy. They worked without rest. The novel was delivered on October 31st, 1 day before the deadline. Stellovsky, hoping to claim Dostoyevsky's future work, was reportedly furious, but the contract was fulfilled. More importantly, Dostoyevsky had fallen in love. Anna was 40 years younger, serious, devoted, practical in ways he had never been. She admired his work without idolizing him. She saw his weaknesses and was not frightened. In February 1867, they married. She saved him, not through love alone, but through relentless practicality. She took over his finances, dealt with creditors, managed contracts, protected him from exploitation. When his gambling addiction resurged during their honeymoon in Europe, she endured it without leaving, knowing he would eventually exhaust it, which he did. After one final catastrophic loss in Baden-Baden in 1871, he stopped gambling forever. The demon that had possessed him for nearly a decade simply released him. He never explained why. Crime and Punishment appeared in serial form throughout 1866, then as a book in 1867. It made Dostoyevsky famous again, but this time as a major novelist, not just a talented writer of social sketches. The novel was immediately recognized as something unprecedented in Russian literature. A psychological thriller, a philosophical investigation, a spiritual drama, all woven together with unbearable intensity. The story is deceptively simple. Raskolnikov, a poor former student living in a cramped Petersburg garret, murders an elderly pawnbroker and her sister with an axe. He does this not for money, though he takes some, but as an ideological experiment. He has developed a theory that extraordinary men, those who will advance humanity like Napoleon, are permitted to transgress moral laws. Ordinary people must obey. Extraordinary people may kill if necessary for a greater purpose. He wants to prove he is extraordinary by committing murder without remorse. But he fails. The moment the axe falls, his theory collapses. He becomes feverish, paranoid, tormented by guilt he did not believe he was capable of feeling. The crime splits him in two. One part insists he was right, that his only mistake was weakness. The other part knows he has committed something unforgivable. The novel follows his slow psychological disintegration over days, then weeks, as the brilliant investigator, Porfiry Petrovich, circles closer. Not through evidence, but through understanding Raskolnikov's psychology better than Raskolnikov understands himself. The counterpoint to Raskolnikov's intellectual pride is Sonia Marmeladova, a young woman forced into prostitution to support her family. She is everything he is not. Humble, faithful, incapable of abstraction. She carries a New Testament and believes in redemption through suffering. When Raskolnikov confesses to her, she does not judge. She tells him to go to the crossroads, kiss the earth he has defiled, and confess publicly. Only through accepting suffering can he be reborn. He resists, clings to his theory, insists he was right. But in the end, he confesses. He is sentenced to 8 years hard labor in Siberia. And in the epilogue, in prison, holding Sonia's New Testament, he begins to feel the first stirrings of something like grace. Crime and Punishment is not a detective novel, though it contains those elements. It is a dissection of the modern mind, the mind that believes it has outgrown God and morality, that thinks reason alone can guide action. Raskolnikov represents the logical conclusion of utilitarian ethics. If there is no God, if morality is just social convention, then why not kill a useless old woman to fund a brilliant career that will benefit society? The math works, but the math is a lie. Human beings are not calculators. We carry within us something the utilitarians cannot account for, a moral sense that cannot be reasoned away. Raskolnikov discovers this too late, but he discovers it. The novel was read as a warning. Dostoyevsky was arguing that Western rationalism, severed from spiritual foundation, would produce monsters. Young radicals who believed in progress through reason would become murderers when their theories met reality. The fact that actual political violence was erupting in Russia made the novel feel prophetic. Just months after its publication, there was an assassination attempt on the Tsar. The revolutionary movement Dostoyevsky had flirted with in the 1840s was turning violent. He saw his younger self in Raskolnikov and was horrified. Over the next few years, Dostoyevsky and Anna lived abroad, fleeing creditors, moving between Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. They were often desperately poor. Anna pawned her wedding ring multiple times. They lost their first child, Sonia, to pneumonia when she was only 3 months old. The grief nearly destroyed them both, but they survived. Anna gave birth to 2 more daughters, Lyubov, and later another, who died in infancy, then finally a son, Fyodor. During this exile, Dostoyevsky wrote The Idiot, published in 1869. If Crime and Punishment showed the consequences of rejecting Christian morality, The Idiot attempted something far more difficult, to show what a truly good person would look like in the modern world. Prince Mishkin arrives in Petersburg from a Swiss sanatorium where he has been treated for epilepsy. He is innocent, compassionate, incapable of cynicism or manipulation. He sees the good in everyone and speaks with complete honesty. He is, in Dostoyevsky's conception, a Christ figure transplanted into 19th century Russia. The world destroys him. His goodness is mistaken for stupidity. His honesty is exploited. 2 women fall in love with him, Nastasia Filipovna, a damaged beauty consumed by shame, and Aglaya, a proud young woman who mistakes his kindness for strength. Mishkin tries to save Nastasia, but his pity is not enough. She runs to Rogojin, a passionate merchant who loves her with violent obsession. In the novel's devastating climax, Rogojin murders her. Mishkin, finding the body, sits beside his friend through the night as Rogojin descends into madness. The shock shatters Mishkin's fragile sanity. He returns to the sanatorium, his mind gone, his goodness erased by a world that could not receive it. The Idiot is a more difficult novel than Crime and Punishment. Darker, stranger, less resolved. Dostoyevsky was attempting to depict perfect goodness, and discovering that perfect goodness cannot survive contact with reality. Not because goodness is weak, but because the world is too broken. Mishkin's failure is not his own. It is ours. We cannot recognize a saint when we see one. We destroy what we cannot understand. The novel divided critics. Some thought it a masterpiece. Others found it formless, excessive, unconvincing. Dostoyevsky himself was dissatisfied, feeling he had failed to fully realize his vision of the beautiful man. But the attempt mattered. He was pushing beyond social realism into something more ambitious. Novels as spiritual investigations, fiction as theology. In 1871, the Dostoyevskys returned to Russia permanently. The debts were finally manageable. Anna's careful management had stabilized their finances. Dostoyevsky began work on his next novel, and this time he would tackle the political radicalism he had once embraced and now feared above all else. Demons, published in 1872, is Dostoyevsky's most politically ferocious novel. It is a savage attack on the revolutionary movement that was gaining strength in Russia, a prophetic vision of where radical ideology leads when unmoored from moral restraint. The novel was inspired by a real event. In 1869, a revolutionary named Sergei Nechayev murdered a fellow conspirator, Ivan Ivanov, because Ivanov had questioned his authority. Nechayev was a fanatic who believed that any action, any crime, any betrayal was justified if it advanced the revolution. He wrote a manual called The Revolutionary Catechism that declared the revolutionary must be prepared to destroy everything, including himself, for the cause. When news of the murder broke, Dostoyevsky saw in it the logical endpoint of the ideas he had once entertained. Revolution without God becomes nihilism. Ideology without conscience becomes murder. The novel centers on Pyotr Verkhovensky, a character based directly on Nechayev. Pyotr is a manipulator, a liar, a man who believes in nothing except the destruction of the old order. He gathers around him a cell of conspirators, each attracted to revolutionary ideas for different reasons. Some are idealists, others are bored. Still others are simply weak and susceptible to Pyotr's charismatic energy. Pyotr's father, Stepan Trofimovich, represents the previous generation of Russian liberals. Men who talked beautifully about progress and enlightenment, but never acted. Stepan is a parody of the 1840s idealists Dostoyevsky had known, well-meaning but ineffectual, full of noble sentiments and empty gestures. His son despises him and everything he represents. The novel's title refers to a passage from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus cast demons out of a possessed man into a herd of swine. The swine run into the sea and drown. Dostoyevsky uses this as a metaphor for Russia. The country is possessed by demonic ideas, foreign ideologies imported from the West. These ideas must be cast out, even if the process is violent and destructive, so that Russia can return to its true Christian foundation. It is an explicitly religious and nationalist vision. The demons are not just political radicals. They are spiritual forces, lies that have taken hold of the Russian soul. The novel's central act of violence occurs when Pyotr manipulates his followers into murdering Shatov, a former revolutionary who has rediscovered faith and wants to leave the group. Pyotr convinces the others that Shatov will betray them, that he must be killed for the sake of the cause. The murder is brutal, senseless, and fractures the group immediately. The conspirators scatter, some flee, others are arrested. Pyotr himself escapes, utterly indifferent to the lives he has destroyed. He was never committed to revolution. He was committed only to chaos. Demons is a difficult, angry book. It lacks the psychological depth of crime and punishment or the spiritual intensity of the Brothers Karamazov. Its characters are often types rather than fully realized individuals. The plotting is loose, sprawling, sometimes confusing, but its power lies in its prophetic fury. Dostoyevsky saw where revolutionary ideology was heading. He saw that once you convince people that the ends justify the means, that morality is bourgeois sentimentality, that God is dead and everything is permitted, then murder becomes policy. Terror becomes virtue. Russian radicals hated the novel. They saw it as a betrayal, a reactionary slander. Dostoyevsky had once been one of them, sentenced to death for his beliefs, and now he was painting them as monsters. But Dostoyevsky was not attacking their goals. He was attacking their methods and their metaphysics. A revolution built on atheism and materialism, he believed, could only produce tyranny. Freedom required a foundation, and that foundation was Christ. Without it, liberation became enslavement. The novel sold well. It solidified Dostoyevsky's reputation as a major writer and a conservative voice in Russian culture. He was invited to speak at public events. His opinions were sought on political matters. He had become, improbably, respectable. But respectability did not bring peace. His epilepsy continued. His temper remained volcanic, and he was haunted by the question he had been circling his entire life. If God does not exist, can morality survive? Or does atheism inevitably lead to nihilism, and nihilism to murder? He would spend his final years writing the novel that attempted to answer that question definitively. But before he could begin, he needed to understand the mind of a man who had lost faith entirely and what that loss would cost him. In 1873, Dostoyevsky became the editor of a weekly journal called The Citizen. It was a conservative publication, aligned with Slavophile ideology, committed to Russian orthodoxy, and suspicious of Western liberalism. Dostoyevsky used the platform to publish essays and sketches that would later be collected as a writer's diary. These writings are essential for understanding his mature worldview. He wrote about crime, morality, politics, the Russian peasantry, the role of the church, the dangers of socialism. He argued that Russia's salvation lay not in imitating Europe, but in returning to its spiritual roots. The Russian people, he believed, were naturally Christian, naturally communal, naturally humble. It was the educated elite who had been corrupted by foreign ideas. This was a dramatic shift from the young Dostoyevsky, who had embraced French socialism and dreamed of revolution. Now he was arguing that Europe was spiritually bankrupt, that its rationalism and materialism had hollowed it out, leaving only cynicism and despair. Russia, by contrast, still had soul. It still believed in something beyond material progress. The task was to nurture that belief, to protect it from Western contamination. These ideas were not universally popular. Liberal intellectuals saw Dostoyevsky as a reactionary, a man who had betrayed the progressive ideals of his youth. Radicals viewed him as an enemy. But Dostoyevsky was convinced he was right. He had lived through the consequences of godless ideology. He had seen where it led, and he was determined to warn his country before it was too late. His personal life stabilized during these years. Anna managed their finances expertly, invested wisely, and ensured they lived within their means. They had a home in St. Petersburg. Their children were growing. Dostoyevsky's health was poor, his epilepsy worsening, his emphysema making breathing difficult, but he was productive. He wrote constantly, driven by an urgency he could not quite name. In 1875, he began working on a new novel. It would be his longest, his most ambitious, his final masterpiece. He called it The Brothers Karamazov. The novel opens with a murder. Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, a grotesque, lecherous landowner, is found dead in his home, his skull crushed. He has 3 legitimate sons and 1 illegitimate son who serves as his servant. Each of the sons represents a different response to the question of God and morality. Dmitri, the eldest, is passionate, impulsive, consumed by desire. He is engaged in a bitter rivalry with his father over money and over a woman, Grushenka. Dmitri is capable of violence, but also capable of profound remorse. He lives entirely in his emotions, swinging wildly between extremes. He represents the Russian character in its raw, undisciplined form, passionate, generous, destructive, and ultimately redeemable. Ivan, the middle son, is an intellectual, a rationalist, an atheist. He has written an article arguing that if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. Morality, he believes, is a human invention, a useful fiction. Without divine authority, there is no objective basis for ethics. Ivan is the novel's philosophical centre, the character who articulates the atheist position with ruthless clarity. He is also the character who will be destroyed by the implications of his own ideas. Alexei, called Alyosha, is the youngest. He is training to be a monk under the guidance of Father Zosima, a saintly elder. Alyosha is gentle, compassionate, capable of deep love. He believes in God and in the goodness of humanity. He is Dostoyevsky's ideal, the character closest to his own heart. But Alyosha is not naive. He understands suffering. He has seen cruelty. His faith is not blind acceptance, but a choice made in full knowledge of the world's darkness. The illegitimate son, Smerdyakov, is a servant raised in Fyodor's household. He is resentful, cunning, and deeply influenced by Ivan's atheistic philosophy. He takes Ivan's argument to its logical conclusion. If everything is permitted, then murder is permitted. Smerdyakov kills Fyodor, convinced that he is acting rationally, that morality is a lie told by the powerful to control the weak. The novel's central philosophical confrontation occurs in a chapter called The Grand Inquisitor. Ivan tells Alyosha a story he has written. In it, Christ returns to earth during the Spanish Inquisition. He performs miracles, heals the sick, raises a dead child. The people recognize him and rejoice. But the Grand Inquisitor, an aged cardinal, has Christ arrested. That night, he visits Christ in his cell. The Inquisitor delivers a long monologue. He tells Christ that he made a terrible mistake by giving humanity freedom. People do not want freedom. They want bread, security, and someone to worship. Christ rejected Satan's 3 temptations in the desert, refusing to turn stones into bread, refusing to prove his divinity through miracles, refusing to rule the kingdoms of the world. By doing so, he placed an unbearable burden on humanity. Freedom requires choice. Choice requires responsibility, and most people cannot bear that responsibility. The Church, the Inquisitor says, has corrected Christ's error. It has taken freedom away and given people what they really want: comfort, certainty, and authority. The Inquisitor does not believe in God. He knows the Church is built on a lie, but the lie is necessary. Without it, humanity would collapse into chaos. The Inquisitor is not cruel. He is compassionate. He has taken on the burden of deception so that ordinary people can live in peace. Christ says nothing throughout the monologue. At the end, he simply kisses the Inquisitor on his aged lips. The Inquisitor releases him and tells him never to return. The kiss burns in the old man's heart, but he does not change his mind. It is one of the most powerful passages in all of literature. Dostoyevsky is dramatizing the central conflict of his life: freedom or security, faith or control, the uncertainty of belief or the false comfort of ideology. Ivan, telling the story, sides with the Inquisitor. Alyosha is horrified. The 2 brothers cannot reconcile their positions. The argument remains unresolved. But the novel does not end there. Dmitri is arrested for his father's murder. He is innocent, but all the evidence points to him. He had motive, opportunity, and a violent temper. The trial becomes a spectacle. Lawyers deliver eloquent speeches. Witnesses testify. The jury deliberates. Dmitri is convicted. Ivan, racked with guilt because his ideas inspired Smerdyakov, confronts the actual murderer. Smerdyakov confesses and then hangs himself. Ivan, unable to bear the knowledge that his philosophy led directly to his father's death, suffers a psychological breakdown. He is haunted by hallucinations, tormented by a devil who mocks him. His rationalism collapses. He cannot live with the implications of his own beliefs. Alyosha, meanwhile, remains steadfast. He comforts Dmitri in prison. He helps the other characters navigate their grief. He does not have answers to Ivan's philosophical objections, but he has something else: love, presence, the willingness to suffer alongside others. Dostoyevsky is suggesting that intellectual arguments about God's existence miss the point. Faith is not a conclusion reached through logic. It is a way of being in the world, a commitment to love despite suffering, to hope despite evidence. The novel ends with Alyosha speaking at the funeral of a young boy, Ilyusha. who has died of illness. He tells the boys who are Ilyusha's friends that they must remember this moment, remember their love for each other, remember that goodness exists, even if they grow up and become cynical, even if they forget everything else, they must remember this. The boys cheer, they shout, "Hurrah for Karamazov!" It is an affirmation of life, of connection, of the possibility that love can survive even in a world saturated with suffering. The Brothers Karamazov was published in installments between 1879 and 1880. Dostoyevsky died just 4 months after the final chapter appeared. He was 60 years old. He never wrote another word of fiction. But in those final months, he witnessed something extraordinary. The novel became a phenomenon. Russians from every class and background devoured it. Intellectuals debated it in salons. Students stayed up all night reading. Ordinary people wept over the chapters. When Dostoyevsky gave his final public speech in June 1880, at the unveiling of a monument to Pushkin, he was greeted like a prophet. Thousands packed the hall. He spoke about Russia's destiny, about the importance of humility and love, about the spiritual mission of the Russian people. The crowd erupted. Strangers embraced. People wept openly. Enemies reconciled. It was, by all accounts, one of the most extraordinary moments in Russian cultural history. Dostoyevsky had become more than a novelist. He had become a moral authority, a voice speaking directly to the soul of his nation. But his health was failing. The epilepsy had worsened. His emphysema made breathing difficult. On January 25, 1881, he suffered a severe pulmonary hemorrhage. He knew immediately that death was near. He called his family to his bedside. He asked his wife, Anna, to read to him from the Gospels. She opened to the parable of the prodigal son. Dostoyevsky listened, tears streaming down his face. Then he said to Anna, "Remember, I have loved you very much." He asked her to place the Bible they had shared for so many years on his chest. That night, he lapsed into unconsciousness. He died the following afternoon, January 28, 1881. 30,000 people attended his funeral. The procession stretched for miles through the streets of St. Petersburg. Students carried his coffin. Writers, artists, revolutionaries, conservatives, believers, and atheists all came to pay respects. He was buried in the Alexander Nevsky Monastery. The inscription on his grave reads simply, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone, but if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." A verse from the Gospel of John that Dostoyevsky had chosen himself. His death marks the end of an era in Russian literature. Tolstoy would live another 29 years, but his greatest novels were already written. Turgenev died 2 years later. Chekhov would emerge in the 1890s, but he belonged to a different generation. Dostoyevsky was the last of the great Russian prophets, the final voice of that extraordinary flowering of literature that had transformed world culture. What makes Dostoyevsky's influence so profound is not just the power of his prose or the depth of his characters, it's the questions he asked, questions that cannot be answered but must be confronted by anyone who thinks seriously about existence. Can we have morality without God? Ivan Karamazov says no. If God does not exist, everything is permitted. This is not an argument for God's existence, it's a diagnosis of the human condition. Without a transcendent source of value, morality becomes arbitrary. Power becomes its own justification. Smerdyakov, the murderer, is simply acting on the logic of Ivan's philosophy. He kills because nothing is forbidden. But Dostoyevsky does not give us easy answers. Alyosha the believer cannot refute Ivan's arguments. He can only offer love. The novel suggests that faith is not about winning philosophical debates. It's about how you live, how you treat others, whether you choose compassion or cruelty, when both are equally justifiable in purely rational terms. Then there's suffering. Why does it exist? Why do children suffer? Ivan's rebellion against God is not based on abstract theology. It's rooted in concrete horror. He cannot accept a universe where a child's tears are the price of cosmic harmony. This is not intellectual posturing, it's moral outrage, and Dostoyevsky respects it. He does not dismiss Ivan's anguish, he lets it stand. Zosima's response is not an explanation. He does not solve the problem of evil. Instead, he points to a different way of being in the world. Accept suffering. Transform it through love. Do not seek explanations. Seek presence. Be with those who suffer. This is mysticism, not logic. And Dostoyevsky suggests that mysticism might be the only honest response to a question that logic cannot answer. Freedom haunts every page. The Grand Inquisitor claims that freedom is humanity's greatest burden. Most people, given the choice, will surrender freedom for security. They will trade autonomy for bread, uncertainty for dogma. The Inquisitor is not entirely wrong. History has proven him right again and again. Totalitarian movements succeed because they promise certainty. They relieve people of the terrible responsibility of choosing. But Christ's silence is a rejection. The kiss is an affirmation of freedom's value, despite its cost. Dostoyevsky, who spent 4 years in a labor camp and witnessed every form of degradation, never stopped believing that freedom was worth the price, even if it meant suffering, even if it meant people would choose evil. The alternative, a world of slaves, was worse. His exploration of psychology predates Freud by decades. Dostoyevsky understood the underground of the human mind, the irrational impulses, the self-destructive urges, the way consciousness fragments under pressure. His characters are not coherent, rational agents. They contradict themselves. They act against their own interests. They are driven by forces they barely understand. Raskolnikov murders not because he needs money, but because he wants to prove a theory. He tortures himself with guilt, while simultaneously justifying his actions. He is at war with himself. Ivan Karamazov's devil is a hallucination, but also the externalization of his own thoughts, his own self-loathing. Dostoyevsky showed that the mind is not a unified thing. It's a battlefield. Nietzsche read Dostoyevsky and recognized a kindred spirit. Both saw that the death of God was not a cause for celebration, but a catastrophe requiring a complete rethinking of human values. Both understood that without transcendent meaning, nihilism was inevitable. But they drew opposite conclusions. Nietzsche said we must create our own values, become Übermenschen, embrace life without illusions. Dostoyevsky said we must return to faith, to love, to community, or descend into madness. Freud acknowledged Dostoyevsky as one of the greatest psychologists who ever lived. The Brothers Karamazov anticipated psychoanalysis's insights into the unconscious, the death drive, the superego's cruelty, but Dostoyevsky went further. He understood that psychological explanation is not the same as meaning. You can explain why someone believes in God through childhood conditioning and neurological patterns. That explanation does not touch the question of whether God exists or whether faith is valuable. Existentialists from Camus to Sartre wrestled with Dostoyevsky's vision. Camus called The Brothers Karamazov the supreme work of existential literature. Ivan's rebellion, his refusal to accept a universe built on suffering, became the foundation of Camus' own philosophy of revolt. But where Dostoyevsky suggested faith as a response, Camus insisted on absurdism. Accept that life has no meaning. Live anyway. Create your own purpose through action and solidarity. Dostoyevsky's influence spread far beyond philosophy and literature. His novels shaped how we think about crime and punishment in legal theory. Raskolnikov's psychology became a case study in the limits of rational choice theory. His portrayal of poverty and social injustice influenced reform movements. His critique of utopian socialism warned against ideologies that sacrifice individuals for abstract futures. In cinema, directors from Bresson to Tarkovsky to the Coen brothers have drawn on Dostoyevskian themes. The descent into moral chaos, the search for redemption, the collision between faith and doubt. Films like Taxi Driver, Joker, and Prisoners explore the psychology of violence and guilt in ways that echo crime and punishment and the Brothers Karamazov. Even in popular culture, Dostoyevsky's ideas circulate. The question of whether morality requires God appears in debates about ethics and religion. The problem of suffering resurfaces every time tragedy strikes. The tension between freedom and security dominates political discourse. We are still living in the world Dostoyevsky diagnosed. But perhaps his greatest gift was showing that literature could do something philosophy cannot. Philosophy argues, literature embodies. Dostoyevsky did not write treatises about faith and doubt. He created characters who lived those conflicts, who suffered them in their bodies and minds. We do not just understand Ivan's rebellion intellectually, we feel it. We are there in the room when he recounts the horrors inflicted on children. We cannot dismiss it as abstract. Similarly, we do not just assent to Zosima's teachings. We experience Alyosha's love, his patience, his presence with the suffering. We see faith enacted, not explained. This is why the novels endure. They do not offer answers we can memorize. They offer encounters we must undergo. Reading Dostoyevsky changes you, not because he convinces you of a particular worldview. Many readers finish the Brothers Karamazov still atheists, or still believers, unchanged in their metaphysical commitments, but they are changed in their understanding of what those commitments mean, what they cost, what they demand. They have been forced to confront questions they might have preferred to avoid. What happens when you take ideas seriously? What are the consequences of your beliefs when you live them out fully? Can love survive in a world of suffering? Is freedom worth its price? These questions do not have simple answers, but they are the questions that make us human. Dostoyevsky spent his entire life exploring the boundary between reason and faith, between despair and hope, between nihilism and meaning. He never resolved the tension, he never offered a system, he never provided certainty. What he offered instead was something more valuable. He showed us what it looks like to struggle with these questions honestly, without shortcuts, without comforting illusions. His characters fail, they sin, they suffer, they doubt, but they also love, they hope, they reach towards something beyond themselves. And in that reaching, in that refusal to accept easy answers or sink into comfortable nihilism, they achieve a kind of nobility. The epileptic visions Dostoyevsky experienced gave him glimpses of something he called the eternal harmony, moments where all contradictions dissolved, where suffering and joy merged into a single, overwhelming sense of rightness. He could never sustain those moments, they lasted seconds, but they convinced him that beyond the chaos and horror of existence, there was something else, something worth the struggle. He spent 40 years trying to communicate that vision through stories. He failed, as all writers must fail, when attempting to capture the infinite. But the failure itself is magnificent. The attempt is everything. Now his words live on, translated into every language, read by millions who will never visit Russia or know anything about the political debates of the 1870s. The specifics fade, the questions remain, and every generation discovers Dostoyevsky anew, finding in his tormented characters and urgent prose a mirror of their own deepest fears and highest hopes. But to understand why those questions struck with such force, we must look at the world Dostoyevsky inhabited, a world convulsing with change, hurtling toward catastrophe, where everything solid was melting into air. Russia in the second half of the 19th century was a nation standing on the edge of an abyss. and everyone could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The old order was crumbling. The new world struggling to be born promised either liberation or apocalypse, depending on who you asked. For 1,000 years, Russia had been held together by three unshakable pillars: the Tsar, the Orthodox Church, and serfdom. By the 1860s, all three were under assault. Serfdom was the foundation of everything. Roughly 23 million peasants, nearly a third of the population, were legal property. They could be bought, sold, gambled away, separated from their families. They had no rights, no freedom of movement, no legal recourse against their masters. Russia's entire economy rested on their backs. Then in 1861, Tsar Alexander II signed the Emancipation Manifesto. The serfs were free. The announcement sparked wild celebrations in the cities. Intellectuals wept with joy. This was Russia's great leap forward, its entry into the modern world. But the reality was far more complicated. The freed serfs received land, but they had to purchase it through redemption payments spread over 49 years. Most got the worst parcels, the least productive soil. Former landowners retained the best fields, the forests, the water sources. The peasants were technically free but economically trapped, still bound to the land by debt. Village communes controlled the redemption payments collectively, which meant individual peasants could not leave without permission. Freedom turned out to be a new kind of cage. Resentment festered in the countryside. The peasants had expected liberation. What they got was a different form of bondage, with a bill attached. Meanwhile, the cities were exploding. St. Petersburg and Moscow swelled with displaced rural workers crowding into factories. Industrialization arrived late to Russia, but with brutal intensity. 12-hour workdays, child labor, no safety regulations. Workers lived in barracks, dormitories packed with bodies, disease spreading through the cramped quarters like wildfire. This new urban proletariat had been torn from the rhythms of village life and thrown into the mechanical hell of industrial capitalism with nothing to cushion the shock. Into this cauldron of rapid change and mounting frustration came the radical intelligentsia. Young men and women from the nobility and emerging middle class who had absorbed Western ideas and returned to Russia, convinced they held the keys to salvation. They had read Hegel and Feuerbach in German universities. They had studied French socialism and English political economy. They had attended lectures on materialism, positivism, utilitarianism, and they had concluded that Russia's problems had rational solutions. Religion was superstition. Tradition was chains. The old moral framework was obsolete. What Russia needed was science, reason, and revolutionary transformation. One figure embodied this new spirit more than any other: Nikolai Chernyshevsky. His novel, What Is to Be Done, written in prison in 1863, became the Bible of the radical youth. The book is barely readable by conventional literary standards, wooden and didactic, but its impact was seismic. It depicted new people, rational actors who had cast off traditional morality and lived according to enlightened self-interest, organizing their lives as cooperative communes, pursuing free love, dedicating themselves to social progress. Chernyshevsky's hero, Rakhmetov, became the template for generations of revolutionaries. He slept on nails to toughen himself. He ate only raw meat to maintain physical strength. He eliminated all personal attachments that might weaken his revolutionary dedication. He was pure will, pure reason, a machine built for societal transformation. This was the new morality, not compassion or love or humility, but calculated utility. If an action advanced the revolution, it was good. If it hindered progress, it was evil. The individual was nothing. The collective was everything. Thousands of young Russians read What Is to Be Done and felt their lives suddenly make sense. They formed communes, rejected their parents' wealth, went to the people to educate the peasants. This movement, called populism, sent waves of idealistic students into the countryside during the 1870s, convinced they would ignite revolutionary consciousness. The peasants had no idea what these strange young people in their villages were talking about. The students spoke of exploitation and surplus value. The peasants wanted to know if the Tsar really intended for them to have all the land, or if the landlords had tricked him. The two groups could barely communicate. The populist movement collapsed within a few years, its participants arrested or disillusioned. But failure did not lead to reflection. It led to radicalization. If the peasants would not rise up, then a dedicated vanguard would act on their behalf. If education did not work, violence would. In 1878, Vera Zasulich walked into the office of General Trepov, the governor of St. Petersburg, and shot him at point-blank range. She was protesting his order to flog a political prisoner. Her trial became a sensation. The jury, swayed by her obvious sincerity and the brutality she was protesting, acquitted her. The crowd outside erupted in cheers. That acquittal sent a signal. Political violence could be justified, even celebrated. Within months, the radical group People's Will formed with a single goal: assassinate the Tsar. They tried bombs, ambushes, mining the railway tracks. Alexander II survived 6 attempts. The 7th succeeded. On March 13th, 1881, a bomb thrown by a member of People's Will tore through the Tsar's carriage in St. Petersburg. His legs were shattered, his abdomen ripped open. He bled to death on the street. The assassins expected the people to rise in revolutionary joy. Instead, there were pogroms. Mobs attacked Jewish neighborhoods, blaming them for the Tsar's death, for the chaos, for everything wrong with Russia. The new Tsar, Alexander III, clamped down with ferocious repression. The radicals were hunted, imprisoned, executed, exiled to Siberia. Dostoyevsky watched all of this unfold with horror and a grim sense of prophecy fulfilled. He had been warning for 20 years that rationalist materialism led inevitably to violence, that once you removed God, once you declared that everything is permitted, there was no logical stopping point. The radicals thought they were building heaven on earth. What they were actually building was hell. The intellectual foundation for this nightmare had been laid decades earlier by thinkers the radicals revered. Ludwig Feuerbach had argued that God was merely a projection of human qualities onto an imaginary being. Religion was alienation, humans worshipping their own essence as if it belonged to someone else. Reclaim those qualities, abolish the illusion of God, and humanity could finally become what it was meant to be. Max Stirner took it further. In The Ego and Its Own, he declared that even abstract ideals like humanity or society were just new gods, new tyrannies. The only reality was the individual ego, and that ego owed nothing to anyone. Morality was a cage. Smash it. Take what you want. This was liberation. The Russian radicals absorbed these ideas and added their own twist. They kept the materialism and the rejection of God, but replaced individual egoism with collective utilitarianism. The greatest good for the greatest number justified any action. If killing one person saved 1,000, it was not just permissible, but obligatory. Dostoyevsky had lived this logic from the inside. In his youth, he had been a member of the Petrashevsky Circle, a group of young intellectuals discussing banned French socialist literature. When the group was betrayed and arrested, Dostoyevsky was sentenced to death. He stood in the freezing cold, bound to a post, waiting for the firing squad. At the last possible moment, a messenger arrived with the Tsar's commutation. The execution was a mock ceremony designed to terrorize. It worked. Dostoyevsky collapsed. When he recovered, he was a different man. He spent 4 years in a Siberian labor camp and 6 more in forced military service. The experience shattered his youthful radicalism. He had gone to Siberia a socialist. He returned a Christian, though not a simple or comfortable one. He had seen what humans were capable of when stripped of social constraints. He had lived among murderers, rapists, men who felt no remorse, who laughed while recounting their crimes. And he had also seen inexplicable kindness, moments of grace in the most degraded circumstances. The radicals of the 1860s and 70s had not experienced any of this. They had theories, they had books, they had confidence that reason could reorganize society from the ground up. Dostoyevsky knew better. He knew that ideas had consequences, that intellectual abstractions turned into real corpses when true believers took them seriously. This is why his novels are populated with characters who embody ideologies. Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment, tests the theory that extraordinary individuals are above conventional morality. He murders an old pawnbroker to prove he is a Napoleon, someone for whom traditional ethics do not apply. The novel tracks his psychological disintegration as he discovers that theory and reality are catastrophically different. Pyotr Verkovensky in Demons is even more chilling. He is a pure nihilist, a man who believes in nothing except destruction. He organizes a revolutionary cell, not because he cares about the peasants or justice, but because he loves chaos. He manipulates everyone around him, driving them to murder, suicide, madness. He is Dostoyevsky's portrait of what happens when you combine radical ideas with a personality devoid of conscience. And yet Dostoyevsky never stacked the deck. His radicals are not cartoonish villains. They are intelligent, articulate, often sincere. Ivan Karamazov's rebellion against God is one of the most powerful arguments for atheism ever written. Dostoyevsky gave his opponents the best possible case. He made their logic compelling, their grievances legitimate. Then he showed where that logic led when followed to its conclusion. The 1870s were a decade of apocalyptic tension. Everyone sensed that the old Russia was dying, but no one knew what would replace it. Would it be gradual reform, a constitutional monarchy, a slow evolution toward liberal democracy? Or would it be violent upheaval, revolutionary terror, the complete destruction of existing structures? Dostoyevsky believed Russia stood at a crossroads. One path led toward Western rationalism, materialism, individualism, the worship of progress and science. That path, he was convinced, ended in spiritual death, in a society of isolated egos, consuming and competing with no shared meaning or purpose. The other path led toward a uniquely Russian synthesis, orthodoxy but purified and deepened. Community, but voluntary and loving rather than coerced. A society rooted in the soil, in tradition, in shared faith, yet open to truth wherever it appeared. This vision, called Slavophilism, rejected the West's mechanical rationality while also rejecting Russia's backward despotism. It sought a third way. Whether this vision was realistic or a beautiful fantasy is debatable. What is not debatable is that Dostoyevsky saw the stakes clearly. He understood that the battle was not primarily political or economic. It was spiritual. It was about whether human beings were nothing but material creatures, driven by self-interest, or whether they were something more, something that could only be understood through categories like soul, conscience, love, and God. The radicals thought they were freeing humanity. Dostoyevsky saw them as the most dangerous kind of tyrant, the idealist convinced of his own righteousness, willing to sacrifice real human beings for an abstract future paradise. This tension exploded into the Brothers Karamazov, where Ivan articulates the radicals' case with devastating power, and Zosima offers the alternative vision, rooted in orthodox mysticism and active love. The novel does not resolve the conflict. It cannot. The conflict is eternal. By the time Dostoyevsky sat down to write his final masterpiece, he was racing against time. His epilepsy was worsening. His emphysema made every breath a struggle. He was 58 years old and looked 70. He had already survived longer than anyone expected, but he had one more thing to say, One final attempt to dramatize the choice facing Russia and the world. The Brothers Karamazov would be his testament, the summation of everything he had learned through suffering, exile, poverty, and decades of relentless questioning. 3 brothers, 3 responses to the problem of existence, and the murder that would force them all to confront what they truly believed. The Brothers Karamazov opens with a family gathering that feels more like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, the father, is a buffoon and a monster. He spent his life accumulating money through shady dealings and indulging every appetite without restraint. He abandoned his children, letting them be raised by servants and distant relatives, while he drank and whored his way through middle age. Now, in his 50s, he's still chasing women, still playing the fool, still incapable of dignity or self-control. His 3 legitimate sons have returned, each shaped by abandonment in different ways. Dmitri, the eldest, inherited his father's passionate temperament, but with a streak of honor the old man never possessed. He's a soldier, impulsive and violent, drowning in debt and desperate for the inheritance his father refuses to release. He's in love with Grushenka, a beautiful woman his father is also pursuing. The rivalry between father and son over money and over this woman creates a tension that feels homicidal from the first pages. Ivan is the middle son, the intellectual. He's spent years abroad, absorbing Western philosophy, writing articles about religion and morality. He's brilliant, cold, tormented by questions he cannot answer. He doesn't believe in God or immortality, and he's concluded that without them, everything is permitted. Morality becomes arbitrary. Justice becomes a fiction. Ivan is Dostoyevski's portrait of the Western rationalist, pushed to his logical conclusion, a man whose intelligence has led him into a wasteland where nothing means anything. Alexei, called Alyosha, is the youngest. He's training to be a monk under the elder Zosima, a spiritual father beloved throughout the region. Alyosha is gentle, loving, incapable of judgment. He sees the good in everyone, even his wretched father. He's the emotional centre of the novel, the character through whose eyes we're meant to understand the others. The family gathering at the monastery, ostensibly to resolve the dispute between Dmitri and his father, descends into chaos. Fyodor mocks the monks, makes obscene jokes, performs his buffoonery with the desperation of a man who's lost any sense of shame. Dmitri storms in late, nearly comes to blows with his father. Ivan watches with detached contempt. Zosima observes it all with profound sadness, then does something strange. He bows down before Dmitri, pressing his forehead to the ground. It's a gesture of prophecy and compassion, acknowledging the suffering that's coming. Shortly after, Zosima dies. The monks and townspeople expect a miracle. Zosima was holy, they reason, so his body should remain incorrupt, perhaps even emit a sweet fragrance. Instead, it begins to decay rapidly, filling the cell with the stench of death. The scandal rocks Alyosha's faith. How could God allow his servant to be humiliated like this? It's a small crisis, but it mirrors the larger question haunting the novel. If God exists, why does he permit suffering, injustice, the triumph of the wicked? Ivan has an answer. He doesn't deny that God might exist. He denies that God deserves our worship. In the famous chapter called Rebellion, Ivan catalogues atrocities: children tortured by their parents, infants bayoneted by soldiers, a 5-year-old girl locked in an outhouse overnight in winter by her mother, crying to dear, kind God to save her. If the universe requires the suffering of even one innocent child to achieve some ultimate harmony, he even says, then he respectfully returns his ticket. He wants no part of such a universe. He rejects it entirely. Then he tells Alyosha a story he's written, a poem he calls The Grand Inquisitor. It's set in 16th century Seville during the Inquisition. Christ returns, walking the streets, healing the sick, raising a dead child. The people recognize him instantly, but the Grand Inquisitor, an ancient cardinal, has him arrested. That night, the Inquisitor visits Christ's cell and delivers a monologue that has become one of the most debated texts in literature. The Inquisitor accuses Christ of a terrible crime. By refusing to turn stones into bread, by rejecting earthly power, by demanding that humans follow him freely rather than through compulsion, Christ showed that he does not truly love humanity. People are weak, the Inquisitor argues. They cannot bear the burden of freedom. They do not want to choose. They want bread, security, someone to worship, someone to tell them what is right. The Church understood this. The Church corrected Christ's mistake. It took away freedom and gave people what they actually need: miracle, mystery, and authority, bread and obedience, comfort and certainty. Humanity is happier now, the Inquisitor says. We have relieved them of the terrible gift you gave them. Tomorrow, he continues, I will burn you at the stake, and the people will cheer because you threaten the order we have built. Christ says nothing throughout the entire monologue. At the end, he simply kisses the old man, gently on his bloodless lips. The Inquisitor releases him into the night. Ivan finishes his story. Alyosha sits stunned. Is this what Ivan believes? That freedom is a curse? That the radicals and the revolutionaries are right to impose their vision by force because people cannot handle liberty? Or is Ivan showing the logical endpoint of a world without God, where power alone determines truth? The text doesn't answer. That's the genius and the frustration of Dostoyevsky. He gives both sides their strongest arguments and lets them stand. Meanwhile, the plot tightens like a noose. Dmitri, desperate for money to run away with Grushenka, confronts his father. He knows the old man keeps 3,000 rubles in an envelope, money set aside to lure Grushenka to his bed. Dmitri breaks into the house one night, finds his father's bedroom, raises a brass pestle above the sleeping man's head. But he doesn't strike. He runs. Later that same night, someone murders Fyodor Pavlovich. His head is smashed in. The envelope is taken. All evidence points to Dmitri. He's arrested, put on trial. The case against him is overwhelming. Motive, opportunity, physical evidence. But did he do it? Dostoyevsky keeps us guessing. Dmitri is capable of murder. He's violent, impulsive, and he hated his father. But he's also capable of holding back at the last second, of being saved by some remnant of conscience. The trial becomes a spectacle. Lawyers deliver brilliant speeches. Witnesses testify. The whole town watches. And slowly, horribly, another truth begins to surface. Smerdyakov, Fyodor's illegitimate son, a servant in the house, is the actual murderer. He's a strange figure, epileptic, resentful, steeped in Ivan's ideas. Smerdyakov worshipped Ivan, absorbed his philosophy that without God, everything is permitted. Ivan once said this casually, not realizing Smerdyakov was listening, taking it as permission. Smerdyakov killed the old man, took the money, and let Dmitri take the blame. He did it, he tells Ivan in a devastating confrontation, because you taught me that it was permissible. If there is no God, no immortality, then why not kill? Why not steal? What makes it wrong? Ivan is shattered. He never intended this. He was playing with ideas, constructing arguments, exploring philosophy. He didn't mean for someone to act on them, but ideas have consequences. Smerdyakov is Ivan's creation, his monstrous offspring. The rationalist who rejected morality as superstition now faces the horror of a world where his logic is taken seriously. Smerdyakov hangs himself. Ivan, spiraling into madness, is visited by a hallucination. A shabby devil who mocks him, who represents everything Ivan despises about himself. The devil tells him that he wants to believe but cannot, that his intellect has become his prison. Ivan's breakdown is Dostoyevsky's portrait of what happens when the mind devours itself, when reason, unmoored from faith, leads not to enlightenment, but to insanity. Dmitri is convicted despite being innocent of this particular crime. He accepts the sentence with strange peace. He's guilty of so much else, he reasons. If not this murder, then 1,000 other sins. He plans to escape to America with Grushenka, not to avoid punishment, but because he realizes he still wants to live, still wants to love. Suffering has not destroyed him. It has revealed something deeper, something he didn't know he possessed. Alyosha, throughout all of this, remains the thread of hope. He leaves the monastery as Zosima instructed, going into the world to practice active love. He helps a group of schoolboys, befriends a dying child, counsels Dmitri in prison, tries desperately to save Ivan from his demons. He doesn't succeed in fixing everything. The innocent are still punished, the guilty escape, but Alyosha's presence changes people. His love is not abstract or theoretical. It's specific, practical, embodied in small acts of kindness and attention. The novel ends not with resolution, but with a vision. Alyosha speaks at the funeral of the boy, Ilyusha, whom he befriended. He tells the other boys to remember this moment, to remember their love for their friend, to carry this feeling forward into their lives. Even if they become wicked, even if they forget everything else, this memory of goodness and connection will remain, a seed that might one day blossom. It's Dostoyevsky's final word. Not a solution to the problem of evil, but a testimony that love is real, that it matters, that it can survive even in a world of suffering and injustice. Dostoyevsky finished dictating the final pages in October 1880. He was exhausted, barely able to breathe, but the novel was complete. He had said everything he needed to say. The book was published serially, the final installment appearing in early 1881. The response was overwhelming. Readers recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary, a work that captured the spiritual crisis of the age with unprecedented depth. On January 26, 1881, Dostoyevsky had a severe lung hemorrhage. He knew it was the end. He asked his wife to read him the parable of the prodigal son from the Gospel of Luke. He told her he was at peace that he had done his work. 2 days later, on January 28th, he died. He was 59 years old. 30,000 people attended his funeral in St. Petersburg, an enormous crowd for a writer. Students, workers, aristocrats, radicals, conservatives, people who disagreed about everything else, united in recognizing that something monumental had been lost. Dostoyevsky was buried in the Tikhvin cemetery at the Alexander Nevsky Monastery. His grave became a pilgrimage site almost immediately. Within a generation, his prophecies began coming true. The radicals he had depicted, the ones who believed in tearing down the old world to build paradise, gained power. The Russian Revolution of 1917 brought the Bolsheviks to control, and they proceeded to enact precisely the program Dostoyevsky had warned against. They abolished God, declared morality a bourgeois fiction, and built a system based on the idea that the end justifies the means. Millions died in famines, purges, and labor camps. The revolutionaries, convinced of their righteousness, created a hell on earth in their attempt to build heaven. Dostoyevsky had seen it coming. Not the specific events, but the logic, the trajectory. He understood that ideas are not neutral. They shape behavior. A society that rejects God will not become more humane. It will become more brutal because it has removed the one foundation that makes human dignity non-negotiable. His novels were banned in the Soviet Union for decades. Too dangerous, too truthful. When they were finally allowed again, Russian readers discovered them with the shock of recognition. This was their history, their suffering, described 70 years before it happened. In the West, Dostoyevsky's influence spread through literature, philosophy, psychology, and theology. Nietzsche admired him as the only psychologist from whom he had anything to learn. Freud saw in him a precursor to psychoanalysis. Existentialists like Camus and Sartre grappled with his depiction of freedom and absurdity. Christian thinkers from C.S. Lewis to Pope Benedict XVI cited him as one of the most profound explorers of faith in the modern world. What makes Dostoyevsky young is not that he provided answers. He didn't. He provided the questions and he showed that they matter. Can we live without God? What happens to morality when we decide it's just a human invention? Is freedom a gift or a burden? Can suffering have meaning? These are not academic puzzles. They are the questions every person faces when confronting the chaos and beauty of existence. Dostoyevsky forces us to think seriously about what we believe and why. He doesn't let us hide behind comfortable certainties or fashionable opinions. He drags us into the depths, makes us look at the darkness, and then asks, "What now? What will you choose?" The man who was sentenced to death and reprieved at the last second spent the rest of his life asking what makes life worth living. His answer, earned through suffering most of us will never know, was this: love is real, freedom is sacred, and the human soul cannot be reduced to matter or explained away by science. We are more than our circumstances, more than our worst actions, more than the sum of chemical reactions in our brains. That more is where meaning lives. 4 decades after a firing squad taught him the value of existence, Dostoyevsky closed his eyes for the final time, confident that he had borne witness to the truth that saved him in that terrible moment when he thought he would die, and in bearing witness, he ensured that truth would continue speaking long after his voice fell silent. The ideas Dostoyevsky wrestled with did not die with him. They metastasized through the 20th century, proving more prophetic than anyone could have imagined. The revolutionaries he depicted in Demons were not fictional exaggerations, they were blueprints. Within 40 years of his death, Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized power, armed with the same certainty that had animated Pyotr Verkovensky, the same conviction that human nature could be remade through violence and ideology. They knew the future, and they would drag Russia into it regardless of the cost. The cost was staggering. Millions starved in forced collectivizations. Millions more disappeared into the Gulag, that archipelago of labor camps stretching across Siberia, where political prisoners and imagined enemies of the state were worked to death in conditions Dostoyevsky himself had endured. The terror consumed its own children. Old Bolsheviks who had made the revolution were tortured into false confessions and executed. Entire populations were deported. The logic was pure utilitarian calculus. Individual suffering meant nothing weighed against the glorious future being constructed. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who survived the camps and chronicled them in the Gulag archipelago, understood exactly what had happened. He saw the direct line from the atheistic materialism of the 19th century radicals to the horrors of Stalin's empire. In his Nobel lecture, he quoted a Russian proverb, "One word of truth outweighs the whole world." That word, he believed, had been spoken by Dostoyevsky, who warned what would come when men decided they could live without God. But the prophecy extended beyond Russia. The 20th century became a vast experiment in ideologies unmoored from transcendent values. Nazism, with its biological materialism, communism, with its dialectical materialism, both reduced human beings to categories, to statistics, to obstacles or tools in the pursuit of abstract goals. Both produced mountains of corpses, and both confirmed what Dostoyevsky had insisted. When everything is permitted, atrocity becomes policy. Yet his influence was not only political. Artists discovered in his psychological depth a new way of depicting consciousness. Stream of consciousness techniques, the unreliable narrator, the fragmented self, all have roots in Dostoyevsky's fractured characters. Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, William Faulkner all owe debts to the Russian, who first showed that the mind is not a coherent unity, but a battlefield of competing voices. Filmmakers found his novels almost unfilmable, yet irresistible. The intensity, the philosophical weight, the moral extremity translate poorly to screen, yet directors keep trying. Bresson's Pickpocket reimagines crime and punishment in post-war Paris. Kurosawa's The Idiot transposes Mishkin to Japan. The Coen brothers' A Serious Man echoes the brothers. Karamazov's confrontation with an indifferent universe. Each attempt captures fragments, never the whole, because the whole is too vast. In theology and philosophy, he remains impossible to classify. Christian thinkers claim him as one of their own, pointing to his defense of faith and his critique of atheism. But his Christianity was strange, mystical, suspicious of institutional religion. Atheist philosophers respect him because he took their arguments seriously, gave them their strongest form, and showed their consequences without caricature. He did not preach, he dramatized. The question of whether he was right remains open. Did the death of God in Western consciousness lead inevitably to nihilism and totalitarianism? Or were those outcomes contingent, avoidable with better philosophy and better politics? Secular humanists argue that morality survives without theological foundation, that we can ground ethics in human flourishing and rational cooperation. Dostoyevsky would have been skeptical. He saw too much irrationality, too much self-destruction, too much evidence that humans do not reliably choose what is good for them or others. What cannot be disputed is that he asked the right questions. Every generation rediscovers him because the questions do not age. Each era faces its own version of the choice between freedom and security, between the humility of faith and the pride of reason, between love and ideology. The specifics change, the structure remains. Students encountering crime and punishment for the first time still feel the shock of recognition when Raskolnikov discovers that his theory cannot survive contact with reality. Readers opening The Brothers Karamazov still find themselves unable to easily dismiss either Ivan's rebellion or Zosima's faith. The novels refuse to let us rest in comfortable certainties. They demand engagement, struggle, choice. This is perhaps his greatest achievement. Not a philosophical system, not a political program, but a sustained demonstration that these questions matter, that how we answer them determines who we become. He lived through the consequences of bad answers. He knew what ideas cost when incarnated in human action, and he spent his last years trying to show us what he had learned, knowing most would not listen, hoping some might. The long shadow he cast continues darkening and illuminating the path ahead. When we debate whether morality can exist without God, we are having an argument Dostoyevsky framed. When we question whether freedom is worth its price, we are echoing Ivan and the Grand Inquisitor. When we wonder if suffering can have meaning, we are standing where Alyosha stood at Ilyusha's grave. The conversations he started have not ended. They cannot end as long as humans remain the contradictory, suffering, aspiring creatures he depicted with such unflinching honesty. In the Tikhvin cemetery in St. Petersburg, his grave remains a place of pilgrimage. People leave flowers, notes, small offerings. They come from every country, every background, believers and skeptics alike. What draws them is not agreement with his conclusions, but recognition of his courage. He looked into the abyss that opens when God dies, or when suffering seems meaningless, or when freedom becomes unbearable. He did not look away. He did not offer easy consolations. He showed what he saw and asked if we could bear to see it too. That question hangs over everything he wrote. Can you bear it? Can you look at human nature in all its ugliness and nobility, at a world that permits children to suffer, at the weight of freedom that crushes as often as it liberates? And having looked, having seen clearly, what will you choose, despair or love, ideology or mercy? The certainty that justifies any crime, or the humility that accepts mystery? Dostoyevsky chose love. He chose it despite everything, despite the labour camp and the epilepsy and the deaths of his children and the grinding poverty and the mockery of critics. He chose it because in the end, it was the only thing that made sense of the moments when life felt worth living. Not an abstract love, not a philosophical principle, but the concrete love of specific people, flawed and failing and struggling, just as he was. That love, he believed, was a thread connecting us to something beyond ourselves, something that might be God or might be the best part of human nature. But whatever it was real, and it mattered. He died believing that. And in the century and a half since, millions have read his words and found in them not answers, but companionship. The companionship of someone who asked the hardest questions without flinching, who descended into hell and returned to tell us what he saw, who insisted that the struggle to find meaning in suffering is not futile but essential. The struggle that makes us human. The man who faced a firing squad and spent the rest of his life insisting that life is worth living, that love is real, that we are more than matter and mechanism. Whether he was right, each of us must decide. But we decide in the shadow he cast, shaped by questions he would not let us avoid, unable to pretend we have not heard his voice echoing across the years.